It's a funny old world, isn't it? Don't you think? Things happen in a peculiar way. Well, only the other day, I had a pipe burst upstairs in the bathroom. Very inconvenient. There's water everywhere coming along. It came through the ceiling, came down here as I was washing up. Very inconvenient, as you know. Well, what do you do when a pipe bursts? Of course, you can't fix it yourself, can you? I mean, I'm not experienced in pipe fixing. So, of course, turned the water off and called the plumber. Got a very nice plumber called Mr. Biscuit. John Biscuit, his name is. Very reliable chap, very conscientious, comes along, takes a lot of pride in his work. He's not terribly fast, but he's very, very good. Or at least that's what I was told. Never actually used him myself, but recommended by a friend. So anyway, he comes along and he comes in. I say, I've got this pipe that's burst. He says, oh, have you? I said, yes, I have. He said, did you turn the water off? I said, yes, otherwise the water would be cascading down the stairs. There was rather a lot of it, you see. He said, oh, very good. A lot of people don't think about turning the water off. And I said, well, luckily I did. Anyway, I took him up to the bathroom, showed him exactly where it was, and he looked at the pipe and he went, oh, yes, yes, I can see that's burst. I said, yes, so can I. He said, what is there to do about it? Well, he said, I can fix that, you know. I said, well, I was rather hoping you'd say that. He said, oh, yes, I can fix that. I can see the seal on this join has gone. I said, oh, well, whatever. I'll let you get on with it. I'll make you a cup of tea. So whilst he went back to his van to get some of his tools and various bits and bobs, I made him a cup of tea and I took it up to him. There was a lot of banging and crashing going on up there. And I was clearing up the mess, you see. Anyway, when I went up there, he says, it's very simple. It won't take long at all. Anyway, it did take long. It took about half an hour for him to do all this, winding bits of tape and using solder and goodness knows what. Anyway, he got it all done and I was very pleased. And as I went up there to inspect the work, he said, you do know there are some other pipes here and joins that look very suspect. I said, what do you mean suspect? He said, oh, they could go at any time. I said, oh, could they? He said, yes, you'll have more water all over the place. Don't want that now, do you? I said, no, not really. He said, I can fix those whilst I'm here. I said, could you? He said, oh, yes, much more expensive to have me come out on another occasion, but if I'm here, I could do it. I said, oh, very well, you better do it then. So he went back down to his van, he got some more pipes and bits and bobs and joints and things, and he started fixing that. Well, it was about another hour, really, until he got it all done, and I thought, well, I hope it is all done. So I went upstairs and I looked at him and I said, you done? He said, oh yes, it's all working now perfectly. So it's just that before I put the water through, I need to ask you about this radiator. I said, oh yes, what about the radiator? He says, does it ever get hot? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, no. It's always been a bit tepid, that radiator. He says, I'm not surprised. I said, why is that? He says, blocked. Really ought to come out. You ought to replace that. Funnily enough, I've got one on the van. I said, oh, have you? I said, yes. He said, they're not cheap, but I've got one on the van. It'd be cheaper if I do it now. I said, oh, all right then, you better do it. So he went down and got into his van, pulled out this radiator, deconnected the other one, and connected it all up. It did take another hour or so for him to do all that, but I suppose it was better to have it done. Anyway, I went up the stairs to the bathroom some time later when it was very quiet, and I was ready for the shock of how much it was all going to cost. And he was staring into a cupboard where we keep the immersion heater, you see. And I said, all right. He was scratching his head. And after a long silence, he said, oh, how long have you had your immersion heater? I said, I don't know, probably about 15 years, something like that. He said, yes, that's about the lifetime of immersion heater of this style. He said, you better change it, really. Otherwise, you'll have red-hot scalding water all over the place. I said, oh, dear, really? He said, oh, yes. It probably won't last another 6 months. Better to have it changed. I'm here now. Just so happens I've got one on the van. So I said, oh, all right then, I suppose you better change it then. So he took the old one out, lumbered down the stairs, ever so conscientious, went in, got the other one, took it all the way up, plumbed it in. And it was all working very well, and he switched on the hot water, and the radiator was working. It was very nice, and the immersion heater was fine. He said, oh, you will need some lagging on this. I said, what, will I? He said, oh, yes, otherwise you're wasting the hot water. It'll go in the tank. It'll be wasted. It'll go cold ever so quickly. I've got some lagging on the van. I'll put that on if you like. I said, oh, that's very generous of you. So he went downstairs, got the lagging, put it on the thing, and that was all good. And I thought, thank goodness, it's getting on a bit now. He said, just before I go, I need to have a look at your ball cock. I said, what? He said, I just need to make sure your ball cock's working. I said, there's nothing wrong with my ball cock, thanks. He said, no, in the water tank. I said, oh, in the water tank? Didn't know there was a ball cock in the water tank. He said, oh, yes, common to have a ball cock in the water tank, only if it's not working, you won't have the flow. I thought, well, that's no good. If my ball cock's not working, I definitely want the flow. So he had a look up in the water tank and he said, "Oh yes, I'm so sorry to tell you." I said, "Yes, I can guess. It's not working, is it?" "No." I said, "Have you got one?" He said, "Yes, I've got one on the van." So he went down to the van, got another ball cock and fitted it in. Anyway, by the time he'd finished all of that, it was getting on. It was pretty much, he'd been here from dawn till dusk. So I thought, well, I'm going to be a bit worried now because he was writing out the bill. It so happened that earlier that day I'd been to the bank. I'd been to the bank because I was going to an art exhibition. I rather like a bit of art, you see, and I'd had my eye on a rather expensive painting. But as it happened, I'd got the cash out just in case I wanted to buy it. Well, when I got the bill from John Biscuit, I had a look at that and I thought, blimey, that's pretty much the same money that I wanted to buy this rather expensive painting. Anyway, I had the cash, so I thought better pay him. So I gave him the money and he was very thankful. There was a somewhat gleeful look in his eye, actually, as he counted out the money, as you can imagine. Anyway, I was very happy to have all the work done. At least I knew it was all in working order and it wouldn't be causing me any problems for some time. So I led him down to the front door, whereupon he went and thanked me very much. We shook hands and he got into his van. Well, I didn't think any more about it and went off to have a cup of tea. And as I went and had a cup of tea, I could hear this strange noise coming from the road out front. So I went to the front room, peered out, and he was sitting in his van, and he seemed to be struggling to get his van to start. So that was very strange. I watched him for a few minutes, and it was no good. He wasn't going to get this van started. So I thought to myself, better go and see if he's all right. So I came out and I tapped on the window and I said, "You all right?" He said, "Yes, bally thing won't start." I said, "Oh dear, that's a shame." I said, "Look, my neighbour, he's a motor mechanic. He runs his business from his garage. Do you want me to go and ask him if he'll come and have a look?" He said, "Oh, would you?" I said, "Yeah, of course." So I went over and I said to Fred, "Fred, come and have a look at this chap. He's been ever so good. He's worked ever so hard in my house and he's trying to get home." So Fred came out and he said, "Lift up the bonnet, mate," he said. And Mr. Biscuit, he lifted up the bonnet. He said, "Yes, I'll have a look." So he rummaged around inside the engine, the old Morris, and he said, yes. He said, "Yes, I know what it is. I know the problem immediately." He said, "Oh, do you?" "Yes, it's the distributor cap." I said, "Oh, is it?" And Mr. Biscuit, he said, "Oh, well, what's that?" He said, "Oh, it's something that distributes the electricity to all the various parts in the engine. It's very important, you see." "Do you know much about engines, Mr. Biscuit?" "No, not really. I'm a plumber." He said, "Oh, yes, it's the distributor cap, all right. But don't worry, I've got one in my workshop." I said, "Oh, that's very lucky, isn't it, Fred?" So Fred went off, got to the distributor cap, came back and put it all on. It seemed to be all right. And he said, "There you go. It's working now. Only I noticed the engine's got a slight ticking sound. Can you hear that, Mr. Biscuit?" Mr. Biscuit couldn't hear it. And to be honest with you, I couldn't hear it. But Fred, well, if Fred says there's a ticking sound, there's a ticking sound. So I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Oh, it's one of the spark plugs isn't firing properly." He said, "You better change it, because if you misfire that, your car won't run very well." So he said, "The trouble is, you can't just change one spark plug, you've got to change them all four." So he said, "Don't worry, I've got some in my workshop." So he went back and he got these 4 spark plugs and the spanners and what have you, and he changed them all, and it was all good. He said, "There we are, it'll run as smooth as a baby now, absolutely no problem at all." He said, "But you did know that your brake fluid reservoir is a bit low. In fact, it's very low. It's almost empty." He says, "Have you had trouble braking?" Mr. Biscuit said, "No, I haven't had any trouble braking." He said, "Oh, well, you will have. You don't have a nasty accident now. I tell you what, I'll top it up for you." So he went back to the workshop where he had a bottle and he came back and he filled it all up for him. So it was lovely. He said, "The trouble is, though, I better just have a quick look, just on the safe side, your brakes and pads, and discs." So he said, "I'll just jack up the front of the vehicle." So he got his jack out and he jacked it up and he had an inspection. And he said, "Oh, yes, I can see the problem. Some of the discs are very well worn." He said, "Better change those, swap them over. It won't take a moment. I've got some discs for this model in my workshop." So he went back to the workshop and got the discs and he put them all on. And he said, "I notice also your tyres, a couple of your tyres are bald." Mr. Biscuit was looking rather glum at this point, not quite sure why. Fred was working as hard as he could. And he said, "It won't take a moment. I'll just swap the tyres over for you. I've got some in my workshop." So it was very fortunate. He went to the workshop, got the tyres, put them on. It was said, "There you go. It's all absolutely fine. There we are." He said, "I have noticed a slight noise in the exhaust, but you'll probably be all right for a few months." Mr. Biscuit was saying, No, it's all right. I can survive without the exhaust." He said, "I'll go and get that done later in the week." He said, "Well, there we are. That's marvellous." He said, "Well, I'll just tot up the bill then." So he totted up the bill and he gave it to him. And I just happened to catch the sight of it. Do you know, it's coincidence really. It was pretty much the same money that it cost me to have all the plumbing done. I thought, there's a funny thing. And Mr. Biscuit, I think, thought there was a funny thing, and he looked at that bill. But it was lucky because Mr. Biscuit had got this big wad of notes that I'd given him for all the plumbing work. So it was very lucky. And so he was able, I think rather reluctantly really, to give it to Fred. And Fred looked at the money and he had a bit of a gleeful eye too, actually, as he was counting it all out, as you can imagine. So he counted it all out. Then he counted half of them and he gave me the other half. He said, there you are, Dad, that's for you. And I said, oh, thank you very much, Fred. That's very generous of you. Mr. Biscuit looked at us and he said, Dad? He said, is he your son? I said, yes, didn't I mention it? Fred's my son. He's just setting up a little business next door as a motor mechanic. I said, I've got a 50% share in his business. Well, I can tell you, Mr. Biscuit didn't like the look of that. He soon shot off very quickly. But it's a funny old world, isn't it?